We charged them with first-degree murder, second-degree murder, third-degree murder, kidnapping, and hundreds of related charges.
When 12-year-old Malinda Hoagland went to the hospital back in May, she weighed only 50 pounds and had more than 75 bruises on her body. Now, the DA has upgraded charges for her father and stepmother to murder. We're going to be speaking with the attorney that is representing Malinda's family. They want justice. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Jesse Weber. Now, we first told you about the Chester County, Pennsylvania investigation into Malinda Hoagland's death a couple months ago. It is a really, really horrifying story. And now we have new information, not only about the charges the defendants in this case face, murder, conspiracy, and so forth, but also what the punishment the district attorney, Christopher DeBerena-Sarobe, wants the defendants in this case to receive.
I can stand here before you today and say that we intend to pursue the death penalty in this case.
So who are the suspects in this case? We're talking about 52-year-old Rendell Hoagland and 45-year-old Cindy Warren. And they could not be more different from each other, at least when it comes to their criminal histories. Why do I say that? Because according to Truthfinder, we found out that Rendell Hoagland has basically nothing on his record before now, just seemingly a speeding ticket. But Cindy Warren's criminal history seems to be a different story, because back in 2009, she apparently pleaded guilty in connection with her then husband beating their 3-year-old son. She was sentenced to 3 to 7 years in prison. And the ex-husband? Well, he's serving a 25 to 50-year sentence for that and for killing his 2-year-old daughter. It's just unbelievable to think about this. It's unthinkable that people can do this to their children. And we will talk about her criminal history and why it's important here in a minute. But just going back to that, Truthfinder that I mentioned that we used for the research in this story, it's a sponsor of ours, and we actually use it a lot in the cases that we cover. It's one of the largest public record search services in the United States. And by the way, Truthfinder can also be used to pull up registered sex offenders in your area, which is just super helpful for peace of mind. And with a paid subscription service, you can get access to unlimited reports of almost anyone. And right now, you can get 50% off of your first month of confidential background reports. Just go to truthfinder.com/LC Sidebar. So back to the story. According to a newly filed criminal complaint, Rendell Hoagland calls 911 on May 4th to report that his daughter had crashed into a tree on her bicycle. Okay, you know what the problem with that is? It doesn't match up with what the medical professionals found, because EMS and emergency room doctors, they noted that Malinda was severely emaciated, weighing only around 50 pounds, and that she had injuries all over her body. The DA said she sustained approximately 75 individually identified bruises, contusions, ulcers, pressure sores throughout her body. 12 years old. She died during surgery. And a forensic pathologist found that Malinda died due to starvation and multiple blunt force injuries. So police, they end up arresting Malinda's father, Rendell, and her stepmother, Cindy Warren. They're being held without bail. And I want you to take a listen to what the DA had to say after a couple more months of investigation.
I'm going to warn everyone that what I'm going to get through and what I'm going to describe is truly unimaginable. It's difficult to hear. It's trying to process. And so now I'm going to set forth and try to discuss the indescribable. While medical experts chronicled her injuries, the team of fabulous detectives here went through and parsed through incredible amounts of data. This was data from cell phones, blink camera videos, and other sources. They found over 450 videos of evidentiary value, hundreds of still images of evidentiary value, and text messages of evidentiary value that spanned 2.5 years. The evidence shows that these defendants communicated regularly about how they were going to terrorize Malinda. She was subjected to physical and psychological torture. And as someone who has reviewed just a small fraction of these photos and videos and text messages, I will tell you that it appears that Malinda was reprogrammed to accept abuse as part of her life. In one video in particular, Cindy Warren was recording and sharing with Rendell Hoagland Malinda crying, holding her hands above her head, holding a stack of books, asking to be forgiven for dropping the books, and then she was beaten with a metal spatula and told that Rendell Hoagland was going to come back and beat her worse.
Now, you might be wondering, where is Malinda's birth mother in all of this, right? Well, according to the DA, she apparently has a severe illness that keeps her from being able to take care of her child. But here is something else. Malinda wasn't the only child living in that house with her father and stepmother. No, she had a younger brother, the biological son of Cindy Warren, who apparently wasn't abused at all. No, he was often featured in Facebook posts with Rendell and Cindy, while appearances of Malinda on their social media pages are more rare.
Correct. Our investigation has revealed that Cindy Warren's biological son, a younger son, was living in that house. And actually some of the evidence reviewed showed that when she would get up to go do something else in another room and was trying to record Malinda, that she would have her son do the recording for her. There's no indication that he was abused. By all accounts, he was treated well in that house.
Okay, so now I want to bring in Attorney Tom Bosworth. Him and his team are representing Malinda's family throughout all of this. Tom, thanks so much for coming here on Sidebar. Can you tell us a little bit first about how you got involved in this case?
Yeah, my colleague Ellie, who's another lawyer, she's co-counsel on the case. She got a phone call from the half-sisters of Malinda, and they wanted to look into what we could do to make sure this never happens again and get some change here, because obviously this was a systemic failure on a lot of levels.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about how this maybe could have been prevented and how this hopefully can be prevented in the future. But how is Malinda's family doing, if you can share that information with us?
They're struggling not just with the death of Malinda, but also with the recent announcement that their father is going to face the death penalty. I think they're having a hard time reconciling these emotions, and it's a very complex and tragic situation, not just to lose somebody you love, your sibling, but then to have your father face these sorts of criminal charges. It's pretty overwhelming.
I was going to ask you about that. I can imagine that's conflicted feelings. Do you know if the DA consulted with them before saying we're going to pursue the death penalty?
Can't get into the specifics on all that, but I know that the family stands behind the prosecution, and they are supporting the prosecution. They want as much justice as we can get.
And let's talk about justice here, because a lot of people have, of course, been asking, how could something like this happen? Is there anyone to blame besides the defendants here, the alleged abusers? You tell me who else we should be considering that might be at fault here.
There's certainly other people and other organizations to blame. This did not happen overnight. This was torture that occurred from 2021 through the time of her death, May 2024. And within that time frame, you have contact between Malinda and a number of agencies, schools that failed miserably to pick up on red flags indicating that she was being physically and psychologically abused. There was involvement from Children, Youth, and Youth Services, CYS in Pennsylvania, whose only job is to protect children. They knew about Cindy Warren. They knew about this order from the court that said she couldn't be around Malinda for a certain amount of time. And they never went to the home where Malinda was with Cindy Warren, despite knowing she was there and despite receiving numerous complaints from school officials and other people concerned that she was being abused. This is a child who was 50 pounds at the time of her death. Her organs were shut down. She had no body fat, and she was attending an online school where she was on camera, supposed to be. There are prolonged absences with no real involvement from the school trying to figure out what's going on. So this could have easily and should have been prevented. There were multiple opportunities in time for this to have been intervened upon, but she was allowed to remain in that horrible environment for years. And it's really unspeakable how in modern day society in this country that happened.
Let's expand upon that a little bit, and we'll start with Ms. Warren. You talked about this court order, right? This idea that she was not supposed to be near Malinda. We talked already about her her prior criminal history, but what was the order specifically, and whose job was it to make sure that it was being enforced? So what's the order, and whose job was it supposed to be enforced?
The order was from a judge in Monroe County, Pennsylvania, which is where Cindy Warren and Rendell Hoagland, Melinda's father, originally met. And the order was from a judge who was overseeing a custody dispute between Melinda's mom and Melinda's father. So as a part of that custody dispute, the judge learned that there was this other person in Rendell's life, Cindy Warren, of course, knew that that she had this prior history. So that's why the judge put in the order that that her contact was to be limited with Malinda. Now, fast forward to when they moved to Chester County, which is where Malinda ultimately died, and where the subject of this investigation occurs. CYS, Children Youth Services, in Chester County became aware that Malinda lived now in Chester County with her father and Cindy Warren. So since it's not 1815 anymore, and we have the internet and we can look up things, Chester County had access to that court order from Monroe County, where they could have seen and should have seen, maybe did see, in black and white, this thing about Cindy Warren. So any person trained, and I would even say if you're not even trained as a CYS worker, you see this court order, you can't be around the kid, and then you learn she's living with the kid. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure out this is wrong. It needs to be looked into. And so it's not a situation where they, pulled the sheep's wool over on them. Like, Chester County knew that Malinda was living with Cindy Warren, and Cindy Warren's history was well documented.
Is that why you believe that there didn't seem to be a ton of social media postings of Malinda with Cindy Warren, right? I think they talked, that was an interesting component of the story. There seemed to be a lot of photos of, obviously, the two of them, and then with her son, but not a lot with Malinda. Was this a way to not tip off anybody that she was living with Malinda?
Absolutely. I mean, obviously, Rendell and Cindy were aware of the restrictions that were placed upon them and the fact that Cindy wasn't allowed to be around her. So I certainly think that that was what was going on. It's just a little bit baffling that the agencies that exist to prevent this sort of thing are, made aware of it. I mean, here's the reality. There are so many situations where children are abused, right? Where nobody learned about it. There was no tip-off. There were no reports. There were no phone calls. That's not this case. That's not this case. This is a case where they were informed. They were notified. They just didn't follow through. So, yeah, I think that, to answer your question, I think that's something that Rendell Hoagland and Cindy Warren were conscious about.
Let's talk about that knowledge in the tip-off. So the district attorney said during a news conference that Malinda was pulled out of in-person school, I believe November 2023, if I'm correct, and then was attending a cyber school that is up until she died, and you mentioned that. But, and correct me if I'm wrong, apparently none of the teachers reportedly noticed anything unusual, said they often checked in with Malinda. What is going on with that communication there, if you can speak to us about that?
I can't speak for the DA, but what I can say is that it's spelled out in the affidavit of probable cause that a school official did report to Childline, which is the phone number that teachers are mandatorily required to call if they suspect child abuse. The teacher did report in late 2023 or early 2024, did report to Childline suspicions that Malinda was abused. There were reports of bruising on her body that were made to the agencies. So Malinda was a resilient, intelligent, and strong child. So somehow, some way, she managed to do well in school academically and prevail as much as anyone could prevail through what she was going through. But that doesn't change the fact that there were obvious signs of child abuse. And just because a kid's doing well with their grades doesn't mean they're not being abused physically or psychologically. That's just not true. And nobody in a position of authority in modern society should think that. Nobody, no school official, no district attorney, nobody should actually believe that child's grades are dispositive of whether they're being abused, particularly where we have documented instances here that while the child was doing well in school, she has bruising on her body. There was a report she had a rug burn on her face so bad that it couldn't be covered with makeup. These are things being reported to Childline by the very school. So that doesn't really move me very much.
Was it only teachers reporting, or were there other people who were noticing these injuries on Malinda?
We're still investigating, so I don't want to speak out of turn and say, because we actually don't know the full contours of it. Well, all that we do know so far is that there were, I think, numerous educators that reported it, and whether there were other folks outside the school system is yet to be determined.
Just to be clear, no agency visited the home, like Chester County Children, Youth and Families, no agency visited the home? And do you know why?
No, they didn't visit the home. They called Rendell Hoagland, and that's where they left it. Do I know why? No. There's no good explanation for why they didn't. We'll find out the answer that somebody will give in a deposition someday under oath, but there's no doubt that it won't make any sense. And it certainly won't be justifiable.
I'm curious your reaction to this comment, because the DA seemed to say that in regards to Chester County Children, Youth and Families, if they had visited the home, he said, I don't think a visit to the house would have shown anything because Malinda had been reprogrammed. What's your take on that?
With all due respect, I think it's preposterous. I think that that statement needs to be viewed through the prism of the fact that the district attorney for Chester County gets his paycheck from the same county that Chester County CYS does. And I'm not saying that I have any knowledge about any conspiracy, or I'm not saying that. But what I am saying is that's an absurd statement, because his office investigated the home and found a number of blink cameras, full-blown surveillance cameras, numerous of them inside the home. And you have a child who is bruised, significantly underweight at that time. So the statement that a home visit wouldn't have revealed anything is kind of like saying that if there's a fire inside of a home, a firefighter couldn't do anything about it. I mean, with all due respect, I don't know all of the DA's motivations in saying that. I don't know why he said that, but there's a reason we have home visits. It's not made up by me or him, because you can learn a lot more, and they would have learned a lot more if they had done that here.
Talk to me about what your goal is, what the family's goal is, pursuing any type of potential litigation. What can you tell us on that front?
First and foremost, we want to make sure this never happens to anybody ever again. Putting aside any money or any financial recovery, we want to make sure that the system itself is fixed, it changed, and strengthened, so that you don't have another Malinda Hoagland, you don't have another story on this podcast about another child enduring this level of inhumane torture. That's the goal. The means to the goal, as a civil trial lawyer, unfortunately, I confront the reality every day that, for better or worse, sometimes money is the motivator, especially when it comes to big companies and agencies. A lot of times they will not change because lawmakers ask them to, or somebody suggests that they do. Sometimes it takes a civil jury verdict, an award of monetary damages, for them to wake up and to change. So we hope to do that here.
Who would you be filing a litigation against, filing a lawsuit against?
At the bare minimum right now, CYS in Chester County, the private school that she was transferred to in late 2023, and the school that she was transferred out of in late 2023 would be the targets right now.
Gotcha. And my understanding is you're also pushing for the creation of a database, right, that would track child abuse offenders, so what happened with Warren wouldn't happen again?
Absolutely. There's no reason that this shouldn't be in law. It was passed in 2014, but never signed into law. To be fair, I don't think this should have happened even without the database, because it's so easy and so obvious here that the child was in a home they shouldn't have been if the CYS workers are doing their job. But this database will ensure that there's no kid that slips through the cracks.
Well, I'll finish up with this. I mean, the DA has publicly encouraged that anybody who's observing any kind of abuse, to call, as you mentioned, Childline, a 24-hour hotline in Pennsylvania, 1-800-932-0313, and the reports can be anonymous as well. Tom, thank you so much for coming on. We're sending our best to the family in what is a very, very difficult moment, and we're wishing you all the best because this really is a difficult situation, and hopefully the family gets the justice that they're seeking and hopefully gets the kind of change that they're seeking as well, Tom.
Thanks so much. Appreciate it.
You got it. All right, everybody, that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. I'm Jesse Weber. I'll speak to you next time.